get two of you out here, going to be the wedge. Guys, we already got tether here, so I might as well utilize that.
What I like to use when a pulley doesn't have this feature is what's called a Bachman knot.
Clean my anchor in my system, and I'm going to undo it first to show you how it works, and then we'll show you how to do it back up here.
A lot of body in the water and a lot of movement. I'm not saying don't go beyond that. I'm just saying you're making a conscious decision at that point.
Rewarming has to happen ultimately from the inside out. So that's what shivering is doing. It's our body's initial response. Like you said, the confusion, that decreased judgment. So you got a decrease in judgment. And what's actually happening there? Why is this a problem in the river environment?
Make stupid decisions.
Yeah, we make stupid decisions. And what happens then? People get hurt, right? So when we start getting hypothermic, we increase our likelihood of injury. We start getting cold. Even before our body core temperature really starts to drop. We start getting cold, we get a little bit confused. Our dexterity really starts to fall apart. Our ability to do small acts using our fingers, that fine motor control. So and that begins to go down as well. This right here is just in mild symptoms. But then we start to transition. Someone said a minute ago the umbles. So what are the umbles? We talked about the mumbling, bumbling, fumbling, stumbling. There we go. There's a really good delineation. When folks start to go ahead and be walking along and they're tripping and falling and they're just not doing well at all, they start getting very withdrawn and grumpy and grouchy. Those people are getting down to a point of actually being in a dangerous level of exposure, and when their body core temperature really starts to drop, it's very difficult to get them rewarmed in cold environments. There's some things we're going to practice today that will help, but once people start getting down into this lower level of moderate hypothermia, at that point in time, we have really missed our beautiful window of opportunity up here to do something about this easily. The colder they get, the harder it is to rewarm them. The colder people get, the easier it is for them to get hurt. And when we're out here, on the rivers especially, how many of you folks are instructors? A lot of instructors here. So you're used to being out on the rivers, responsible for people's safety. When we're teaching instructors, when we're teaching these types of courses, anything at all, what we're going to hear over and over again, we're telling you guys is this: create your own realities. Make things what you want them to be. Do not become just a victim of circumstance. You create your circumstances. We're going to talk about how we can prevent these types of problems. We're not going to go beyond moderate hypothermia discussion today. As he said, this is not a certification course. What we're trying to do is give people just good working knowledge about identifying on the front end. Prevention of hypothermia is where it's at. Just 120 degrees Fahrenheit. If we are colder than that, then hypothermia is very, very possible. And at that point in time, we get below that 120 degrees Fahrenheit, we need to make sure that we're wearing proper gear, good equipment that's designed for that. If you guys are instructors, you're taking people out on the river, you need to make very sure that they're wearing correct gear for being in the water. They're going to wind up in the water. They're new paddlers oftentimes. We expect this. So we plan for this so that we don't wind up with bigger problems. This is part of our risk management process, is making sure that these folks don't get too vulnerable. That makes sense? Yep. So what we're looking at here is the air temp and water temp at least 120. So what sort of clothing is appropriate? What are we looking for?
Layers.
Okay, neoprene, dry suits, at least splash gear and fleece, things like that, but something that's going to actually keep these people warm if they get wet. So that's a big one there, exposure to the cold. How do we limit that? There's just some ways to limit that. What else gets people exposed and increases the likelihood of hypothermia? The main thing is this. We talked a minute ago about what keeps us warm as far as shivering, and that metabolism. As we're burning fuel, if we do not have that water in there, that fluid in the system, then our metabolism does not work properly, and we're not able to burn that fuel effectively. So people who are dehydrated are automatically going to be more likely to become hypothermic because they're not able to access the fuel that may be in their body, and it's not going to burn right. They're not going to be able to break it down properly. So dehydration is a big part of that. And let's tie it back to, we were talking about some signs and symptoms of hypothermia. What about dehydration? What are some signs and symptoms of dehydration? Decreased judgment, decreased mechanical skill, actual motor ability, irritable.
Grumpy. Dehydrated people get really grumpy.
Yes, it
Really
actually
grumpy.
gets into the same molds. These things all tie together. All the things we're going to talk about today all tie to each other. Everything is connected. So if people are dehydrated, they're more likely to get cold. Cold people, transversely, are more likely to become dehydrated. There's a process that happens in our bodies as we are getting cold, it's called shunting, and that's where our kidneys are actually stepping up in urine production, shifting out of the body, and we are getting rid of fluid more quickly. Always seems like in that cold weather, you need to go pee, and the reason is it's called cold diuresis, and it is a quick shedding of additional fluids out of the body as our body starts to collect that core fluid and shutting things off to the exterior, kind of closing the windows to the outside, and that's one of the byproducts of that.
So it doesn't have to keep that water warm.
Yes, exactly. So we've got all these different things that are happening. At that point in time, if we are not combating that, that too will dehydrate us. So cold diuresis is another factor. So these are causes of hypothermia. What else causes hypothermia? So we've got that lack of dehydration, so a lack of water.
Lack of food.
There it is. A lack of fuel in the form of food. So lack of food. So oftentimes you'll have people come in, or we're dashing off, jump up first thing in the morning, go into the river, swing through, get some donuts, get some coffee, and go jump on the water. What's the problem? Yeah, we're dehydrated to start with, and then we don't have any good fuel on board. We're going to talk in a few minutes about what we do about this, but consider that it's very important that before folks go into a cold environment, or even a cool environment, and increase the amount of physical activity that they have, they need to have plenty of fuel to burn. We don't start off across the mountains, hopefully, without a full tank of gas, right? That's what we're thinking about. It's okay, I need to make sure I fuel up. Well, it's the same thing we're getting on the river. If we do not have that full tank of fuel to start with, we're liable to run out partway down. When people start running out of fuel, things start to go wrong for you, especially as instructors. You take people out there in these more remote areas especially, you don't want them running out of fuel, because then it becomes your problem. Once again, I use that term, create your own reality. Make sure that you're making plenty of focus on keeping them hydrated and keeping them eating snacks throughout the day. Make sure they've got stuff with them to eat. It makes a huge difference. When we let people start to get hypothermic, we let them get weak, let them get shaky, at that point in time it's an uphill climb to get out of that problem. But we can avoid it. This is science. We know what happens. We know that if people are not properly hydrated, not properly fed, not properly clothed, this problem will happen. We know what's behind door number 3 there. We don't even have to open it. We just go the other way. So body type, people who have very slender bodies are more prone at times. Do be aware there's variables on all of this, but just as a grouping, you can say, okay, that person right there probably going to be a little more susceptible. That person right there is a little thicker, a little more body mass, probably not quite as susceptible to this problem. Age is a big one. Kids get cold fast. If you got children that are getting goosebumps, getting a little shaky, getting a little whiny, I get that way too. Okay, but at that point in time, we need to make sure that we actually go and do something about this problem on the front end. Get in front of hypothermia. Don't let it get to the point we were talking about previously, where they're actually in a hypothermic state and having all these problems that have to be taken care of. So age, also getting older. As we age, our bodies once again become less able to effectively thermoregulate. Let's talk down these. Let's define these. What is convection? A medium crossing a body. Yeah, it can be air, and by some definitions it can also be water. But it's where the heat is being taken from that body by movement of a medium across the body. So yeah, so that could be someone's down in the water. If we have somebody, they take a swim, what do we need to do immediately? Out of the water, no legs in the water, no feet in the water. We get them out of the water. Okay, and as far as convection, other ways of breaking that, if someone's sitting there wet, When the wind's blowing past them, especially if they're wet, then they're losing even more to convection. We're going to talk more about that. Evaporation, what do we got there?
Sweating.
Sweating, okay. What else?
So whether the water as it evaporates off of them.
The person who is wet and they're sitting there and we're having that matter change, that water is turning to vapor. As it turns to vapor, it's actually taking additional heat from the body. So that's what we're watching for there, as of the evaporative problem. We were talking a minute ago about proper clothing. What do we want to avoid in the water environment?
Cotton.
Yeah, there it is. Okay, there are places for cotton. I'm actually wearing cotton right this second. These pants are mostly cotton. It's got its place. But in the water environment and cold environments, cotton is really very problematic. We try to shy away from it. There's so many better materials, and it's important to have those synthetic or at least a non-absorbent material all the way from our undergarments all the way out. So it's not just that outer layer, it's all the way from the body